my name is Sarah Adkins, and for my SCE, I chose to research Joy Harjo, and more specifically, I chose to look at the way in which she presents the healing power of memory and the psychology of new historicism. So I think that we can all agree that the past plays a critical role in a culture's history, and that oftentimes, because history is told from the victor's point of view, this results in skewed historical accounts. And so this is where the importance of multiple perspectives, and in the case of this presentation, of Native American cultural perspectives in particular, come into play, because they use their voices to call out oppression and present their own cultural narratives and truth. And they also showcase the Native American cultural experience. And then also, there's the added benefit of any lessons that we can learn from individuals or cultures, like in the case of Joy Harjo, as she presents the healing power of memory and storytelling. So I've broken my thesis statement down into three sections just to make it more understandable. So first, I'm going to look at the way in which Joy Harjo uses her poetic voice to call out the injustice of historical cultural oppression and to explore the resulting negative emotions that pervade the Native American community, and how from there she prescribes storytelling as the antidote to this issue, showcasing that memory has the power to overcome trauma. And then from there, after looking at Harjo's proposed solution, I would like to connect that to New Historicism and use that to explain why this theoretical lens should be applied. And then finally, I'd like to tie in the theoretical lenses of feminism and eco-criticism into the lens of New Historicism in order to showcase the importance and power of multiple narratives within the diverse perspectives already promoted by New Historicism. So I would like to first begin by looking at the healing power of memory and storytelling as promoted by Joy Harjo. So it's important to note that Harjo does promote the healing power of memory, but she also recognizes that memory can be damaging. In Amila's interview of Joy Harjo by Helen Jaskowski and Joy Harjo, Harjo discusses the weight of knowing and the acknowledgement of destruction, and how she was actually hesitant to begin to write poetry about her culture and about history because she knew that it was very heavy. But that said, she says that the first step to healing is to acknowledge the problem and its negative effects and to acknowledge history so that one can then look at the healing power of memory. So in Twin Gods Bending Over, Joy Harjo and Poetic Memory by Nancy Lang, she talks about how Harjo's poetry presents memory as working in a circular cycle. So a good memory starts kind of a cycle of good memories, and a bad memory starts a cycle of bad memories. And so whether you're looking at a memory in a good or bad light will make it either damaging or healing going forward. And this is on both an individual basis of your next memory as an individual being damaging or healing, and also as a cultural basis. And that said, there is kind of a caveat to the healing power of memory, in that one must first take personal responsibility and take the power of memory back. And so obviously, Joy Harjo is not at fault or anything for any of her culture's historical oppression, but Harjo says that in order to access memory's healing power, one has to kind of go in and acknowledge their own role in allowing memories and negative histories to have power over them and take the power back. So we see this in her poem, I Give You Back. So she starts out by acknowledging the negative history. She talks about white soldiers who, quote, burned down my home, beheaded my children, raped and sodomized my brothers and sisters, stole the food from our plates when we were starving. But towards the end, she makes this resolve to take herself back, and to not allow fear to have any place in her life or in her body. And so she takes personal responsibility throughout the poem for allowing fear to have power over her, and then she takes that power back in order to access the healing power of memory. So, and from there, she can spread that healing power that she herself has received onto the next person. So, in An Art of Saying, Joy Harjo's Poetry and the Survival of Storytelling by Mary Lean, Lean talks about how Joy Harjo's stories and poems have creating power, and how she promotes this idea that storytelling can erase borders and blur the boundaries of history and experience. And so, by putting a twist at the end of the poem of taking herself back from fear, she spins that memory into something positive and something that can be healed from. And so storytelling not only promotes survival and that stories are told, but it also promotes the possibility for healing despite trauma as we pass survival and healing stories down through individuals and through cultures. So next, I'd like to look at Joy Harjo and the critical literary theory of New Historicism. So far, I've talked about how memory can have lasting traumatic effects, but that it also holds the healing power to overcome trauma, and how in order to do this, we have to take personal responsibility and confront painful cultural memories, but that from there, storytelling can be used as an antidote and encouragement to others to persevere. So what is New Historicism? New historicism looks at the fragility and limitedness of a singular historical narrative and is very concerned about the danger of bias. So Murphin puts it best when he says that new historicist critics are less fact and event oriented than historical critics used to be, perhaps because they have come to wonder whether the truth about what really happened can ever be purely and objectively known. So to kind of sum that up, new historicists are skeptical to believe that historical accounts encompass all nuances and interconnectednesses of history in an effective and factual way, because they know that oftentimes the historical narrative is skewed, um, or even the way that we read it can be biased. Solutions that it poses to this issue of bias is first, there's historical deconstruction, so kind of looking at history and acknowledging that it's just not going to be true. But also, there's the ability to consider the reliability of the narrator. Anybody that has ever taken an English class or even read a book knows that it's incredibly important to consider who's telling the story and whether that person can be trusted, because that determines whether or not the story can be trusted. Next, we can publicly acknowledge potential biases and distortions. The field of psychology recognizes that you have to utilize the perceived experience in order to facilitate healing. So if someone is going to talk to a therapist about an event that happened to them, the therapist not only has to determine what event happened, but they also have to determine how that person's brain took in that event and how that affected them as an individual. And by combining those two, like the truth and the individual truth, we can facilitate healing. And so, in the same way, it helps to look at multiple perspectives in history. So, for example, I'm speaking to you on a video today, and wherever you are watching, you could be asked to recount what I've said to you thus far or what this presentation is about. And your account might be different than someone else who watches this video's account. And it also might be slightly different from my own account as the presenter. So, in order to get a full picture of what's going on right now in my presentation, it would help to look at everybody's perspective of them watching it. And that way we can get the most well-rounded view of what's going on in this presentation as I speak. And so Harjo's take aligns with this because she promotes memory and cultural memory and historical memory and the truth of what happened in order to facilitate that healing. And so lastly, we also need to consider multiple different differing perspectives and voices in order to get that full, well-rounded view. And in order to do this, we can utilize literature and different authors and different cultural perspectives. So Joy Harjo's New Historicism would align with this. She utilizes New Historicist perspective to add in the perspectives of Native American voices. So she talks about the potential to experience the healing power of storytelling. In Haunted Memories of Disruptive Ghosts in the Poems of Brenda Marie Osbey and Joy Harjo by Tracy Watts, she talks about how Harjo uses memory to reveal history's wounds while working toward more sustainable interpretations of past practices, and how there's this importance of acknowledging the past in order to move toward a more complex, more multi-voice present. And so there's just this idea of looking at multiple voices and multiple perspectives in order to heal from history's wounds. Jeremy M. Carnes, in his article Reinventing the Enemy's Intentions, Native Identity in the City and the Poetry of Joy Harjo, also talks about working toward building a community between people, not just natives. So there's just this broad pulling in of perspectives in order to get a perspective that spans cultures and spans individual experiences. So in the spirit of this, I think it's important to look at how individual cultural perspectives are also nuanced and how cultural narratives can also discuss other relevant social issues within the culture. And so by looking at topics through the additional lenses of Native American culture and New Historicist theory, we can deepen their societal relevancy both in the past and in the present. So first, I would like to look at feminist theory, and then we will look at eco-criticist theory to kind of put this New Historicist solution into practice. So, what is feminist theory? Feminism is a movement that analyzes and questions every political, social, and aesthetic priority throughout society through the lens of gender differences. Nancy Lang talks about how Harjo's poetry most clearly illustrates the multi-voice nature of any marginalized poetry, and of Native American women's poetry in particular, because Harjo not only is presenting Native American culture, but she's also presenting the woman's experience and perspective within Native American culture. So, the New Historicist theory would say that feminist theory gives insight into the experiences and perspectives of Native American women, such as Joy Harjo. So I'd like to look at Harjo's poem entitled The Woman Hanging from the 13th Floor Window. And so at the beginning of this poem, there's a woman who's caught in a cultural identity crisis. She's caught in between, physically in between the asphalt below and the building that she's holding onto, and also caught culturally between her past and her present. And so she's not alone because she's haunted by memories of the past, but she is alone in that she's lacking a sense of purpose because she has no more husband or children to take care for. And this is said to be the universal experience of Native American women, which we can glean by the fact that the woman in the poem is given no name. Um, and this is likely because, as Harjo herself says, she is all the women of the apartment building who stand watching her watching themselves. So here I put in an excerpt from the poem, and I would just like to draw your attention to how, in the earlier lines of the poem, the woman defines herself by her children Carlos, Margaret, Jimmy, her parents, and her two husbands that she's had. But how at the end of the poem, she has to realize that she is the quote, the woman hanging from the 13th floor window, and she knows she's hanging by her own fingers, her own skin, her own thread of indecision. So just this idea that she has to find her own purpose and she has to find her own motivation to get up. And so it's important that there's an ambiguous ending. Harjo leaves the ending open and the decision unmade. The woman is both falling and climbing back up. And so by leaving the decision unmade, Harjo gives all of her women readers that can relate to this experience the choice to climb up from the edge and claim themselves again or to fall. So next, I would like to look at eco-criticist theory, because again, it's important to look at more than one perspective culturally, but also within a culture. So what is eco-criticism? To really simplify it, eco-criticism focuses on the representation of the natural world within literature. So it's going to look at how nature is portrayed throughout works. So in Finding the Way Back, Place and Space in the Ecological Poetry of Joy Harjo by J. Scott Bryson, he talks about how Harjo uses her poetic voice to call readers back to nature, and that she showcases this theme of alienation that stems from a lost sense of place and ignorance of nature's wildness and humans' relationship to it, and how her response to that is to delve into her tribal heritage and recover perspective. And memory is the key to doing this, and the connection with nature is an essential part of memory and the healing process. So I'd like to again return to the woman hanging from the 13th floor window, but this time through an eco-criticist perspective. So it's important to note that this is an entirely urban setting. There's no real talk of nature except to juxtapose nature against the woman's concrete and asphalt-filled present. And this is in order to showcase the inability of the woman to reconcile her urban environment with a natural one. She talks about how remnants of nature in her memory oftentimes just kind of, quote, sputter and butt against the asphalt, and how she hangs from the 13th floor window crying for the lost beauty of her own life. So once again, there's this ambiguous ending. And in this case, it's asking, instead of looking at a woman's perspective and experiences, it's looking at a Native American cultural experience in an entirely urban setting. And this ambiguous ending instead asks, will the narrator succumb to the city or return to nature? Because the city seems to mean death as she falls to the ground, whereas the return to nature would be climbing back up again. So in conclusion, I think it's important to note that the past plays a critical role in history, and that narratives are often skewed because historical accounts are often told from the victor's point of view. And this can further and deepen trauma within a culture. And so this is where it's important to bring in multiple perspectives and narratives to work to heal and reconcile historical wounds, and and in particular in this presentation, I promoted the importance of hearing from Native American authors who use their voices to call out oppression and promote healing and truth. So Joy Harjo presents memory and storytelling as a healing process, and new historicist critical theory would agree. And it would also promote the use of literature to gain diversity and perspective. And from there, it's then important to bring in even more perspectives and more experiences, such as I did with feminism and eco-criticist theory. And hopefully by doing this, we can begin to foster a community of humankind that spans cultures and that increases our understanding of one another on an individual and a cultural level. Thank you.